Good morning, Lenore.
Morning, Bridie.
Good morning, Patrick.
Morning, Bridie.
And good morning, Joe.
Morning, Bridie.
There are two things dominating the headlines this week, Mamdani and net zero. Lenore, can you see a connection between these two things which are happening on opposite sides of the world?
Strangely, I can, Bridie. They seem to me like the absolute polar opposite ways to approach politics. Mamdani kind of threw out the old rule book about how to run a political campaign. He was completely online. He was completely authentic in his messaging. He had concrete policies. He kind of said, I'm for the working person. He gave hope to all kinds of New Yorkers, diverse New Yorkers, young New Yorkers. He said that things could change and he promised that he would be different, and he looked different and he looked authentic. The Coalition's climate policy, by stark contrast, is almost the definition of inauthentic policymaking. I mean, infuriatingly, to my mind, wickedly inauthentic policymaking. They, for probably 20 years now, have tried to pretend that they have a policy to reduce emissions while actually having a policy that doesn't do very much to reduce emissions. They're trying to have a bob each way to paper over the divisions in the coalition between climate deniers and the people who can read the science. Obviously, the electorate doesn't believe them. That's why the Teals are occupying all the former Liberal seats. No one is buying this bob each way tactic. It's totally inauthentic, and now it is happening again, almost exactly as it's happened in all the previous iterations of this argument inside the coalition. And so I think that's the connection. Like, that is how politics looks authentic, and this coalition debate, if you want to call it that, looks totally inauthentic.
We'll get further into the coalition in a minute, but we'll just stick on Mamdani. It's quite extraordinary in itself that we are talking about a New York mayoral race on this Australian news podcast, but that campaign has resonated around the world. What lessons do you think politicians could take from it?
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. My social media algorithm has been all New York mayoral race all week, which says a lot also about how algorithms now work and how politics has become global because of it. But I think what it says is that authenticity that Lenore spoke about, and that ability to identify a problem in society and present a solution to that problem as a politician, is so much rarer than we think. And I think that is a huge part of why he has proved so effective. Like, he identified that people are paying too much in rent. He said he's going to freeze the rent. It's like, we identify a housing crisis in Australia, and you ask politicians, well, do you want to bring down the cost of housing? Oh, no, we don't want to bring down the cost of housing. And it's like, no wonder people don't trust politicians. But here is a guy who has a relentless kind of focus on key issues that matter to people and a series of simple fixes to those problems or policy solutions to those problems. He also comes across as really authentic. He is not somebody who ties himself in knot trying to think of a focus group kind of answer. Like, think about the way he has handled Gaza during that campaign. He stood out at the first debate because when he was asked would he go to Israel, he said, no, I will stay here and I will focus on New Yorkers. He's used the word genocide when others wouldn't. Like, you believe that what he thinks is what he says. He is consistent. And I think the fact that he has cut through in the way he has is really kind of an indictment of where politics, and particularly kind of centre-left politics, is otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's the part of it that really feeds into it, is there's this general sense of malaise with the type of politics we have now. We are lucky in Australia in many ways that we have a fairly centrist government that's stable, that's, you know, taking action on climate change and doing all these things. But for politically engaged people, there is this feeling that there could be so much more. And looking at Mamdani in the US and the potential to have a different type of politics, I think is really appealing for a huge range of people.
I think it's interesting, though, how the Democratic machine didn't rush in to back him first up, right? Like, Chuck Schumer didn't endorse him, wouldn't say how he was going to vote. Now, after the fact, you know, they're all in, like, this is the way to go. And I do think, you know, for the Democrats, clearly there's hope now. There's, you know, they're excited. They've won not just in New York, but in other states as well. And, you know, there's a sense of maybe there's a way to combat Trump with this kind of politics. But I think they're going to have to figure out how to be a broad church, like lots of other states are not like New York. They're going to have to figure out how that kind of politics translates to other kinds of candidates. But I think the key, the authenticity key, is what they're kind of waking up and going, oh, you know, if we promise things that people actually want, maybe they'll vote for us.
And having an economic message that really cuts through. Like, I think both the Kamala Harris campaign, the Hillary Clinton campaign were very diffuse, like in identifying the struggles of working Americans as their focus, and people did not really see them as on their side. And I think what Mamdani showed is that the way to beat Donald Trump, friend of the billionaires, is to come out with a relentless economic message. And you don't have to be a democratic socialist to focus on economic issues. You could do that as a more centrist Democrat, but a relentless focus on the economy and on improving people's lives, addressing childcare, transport, you know, like the basic things that people need is what people want to hear, and they want solutions.
And I think it's the way to undercut the whole culture war message as well, because you're promising, here's how I solve your problem. I'm not telling you here's someone to blame. I'm telling you here's a solution.
Yeah.
Look, in some ways, I think I can understand the reluctance of many sort of mainstream Democrats to put all the chips on Mamdani initially, because, as Lenore said, what works in New York is not necessarily going to work in the Midwest or, you know, elsewhere across the country.
But wasn't the sort of reluctance of the sort of old guard of the Democrat Party also that he's saying he's going to put a tax on rich people? And, you know, they are very connected with a lot of rich people. Like, they were part of the establishment, and he's kind of undercut that and shown a different way through.
I think they're worried about how that message could be
Sure.
weaponized and used in places across the US where it comes across for some voters as extreme. And even the idea of a socialist candidate in the US, you know, for a voter in the Midwest, that's a scary proposition.
Yeah. And Trump's calling him a communist.
Yeah, and Trump's calling him a communist. And I think they were worried about how that would play in different areas around the US.
Do you think a Mamdani-style candidate could ever break through in Australia, or are there too many barriers?
I think possibly. I do think so. I think certainly young voters are and young Australians are responding to sort of very political online influencers who have very direct messages like that, and some of them are intending to go into politics. They've responded to sort of more authentic grassroots campaigns by independents and by Teals. I think we have to reflect a little bit in the media in general that one of the reasons that politics became so scripted and focus group driven was jumping on anything that anybody said slightly wrong, a slightly incorrect answer, a slightly loose comment, and having a gotcha moment out of it. I think the influence of News Corp in Australia is a sort of a weight on someone like Mamdani cutting through, but I don't really see why not, actually.
I think Mamdani was a Democratic candidate, and I think if you look at the other main centre-left party in Australia, the Labor Party, I can't see how a candidate like that would necessarily get through the existing party structures. And you know, in the US they have primaries, but here we have pre-selections
where the party decides who the candidate is.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's a much stricter process in the Labor Party, and often even before you get to the point of the pre-selection, you've got to spend time building support within branches. You've got to spend time in the party machinery. You've got to spend time as a staff or a union representative. And the sum effect of this is it really narrows down the type of candidates we have in Australian politics, and I think restricts their worldview as well. Like, if you look at the first parliament in 1901 in Australia, the most common occupation was journalist, followed by, you know, shearers and pastoralists and things like that. But, you know, the most recent parliament, it's basically lawyer and trade unionist. And
former political staffer.
Former political staffer, exactly. So
not even lawyers, they just
and if you look at Mamdani, he was a rapper. He had a very
but he wasn't the
he had different
well.
he had a whole different range of experience.
That's
that he brought
absolutely
with
true.
him into
but
that.
Also, I think you're right about the way that the parties squeeze out authentic candidates like that, but they're coming in outside of the parties, and the main party vote is reducing. And I think people, you know, if they don't start changing those processes, people are going to keep looking elsewhere as they have been.
And you look at independents, like some of the Teals or Jackie Lambie, for instance, and they bring a lot. I think voters resonate with them because they bring more authenticity to those roles.
It is hard though, and I think a Mamdani-esque candidate is probably not going to come through the Labor Party in Australia. Like, if someone with Mamdani's views is probably more likely to end up in the Greens in Australia or as an independent. You know, we saw David Pocock break through and become a senator, but that's really hard. Like there are, when you refer to, you know, influencers who might be running for politics, I think Hannah Ferguson has indicated she wants to run for the Senate in New South Wales. That's an incredibly difficult electoral maths to break through. Like it is almost impossible for independents
But once they
like
do,
that.
they tend to get re-elected.
That's true. That's true. So I think you might see it outside of the party structures here, but I also do think Mamdani is like a once in a generation political talent who has like that kind of mixture of, you know, charisma and strong politics and sort of fearlessness that is very difficult to replicate.
But I think the party structures do have a lot to answer for. Like, if you look at what happened with Fatima Payman, like, it was basically her positions became inconsistent with the Labor Party, and she was essentially, there was nowhere for, she had to leave. Like, whereas you could envisage a Labor Party that, you know, you can't have a candidate in the Labor Party who's like Joe Manchin in the US, where it's such a broad church that you have people that,
like
Bernie
Bernie would be
Sanders,
kicked out of the Labor Party if
exactly.
there was a
Yeah,
similar
you
structure.
need,
but
maybe they need to envisage a Labor Party where you can actually have people that are
coalescing
around it and not necessarily parroting every party line and you know, being strictly adherent to the doctrine.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to elegantly segue from Mamdani into net zero. So from a candidate who's inspiring the electorate and dominating headlines to the opposition, which is just dominating headlines. What happened within the coalition this week?
The National Party has decided that they are rejecting net zero, and the Liberal Party doesn't know what to do. It is the most brain-dead debate I've seen since the last time the coalition started to talk about this. I mean, to start with this, they're focusing their whole fight on a target and whether it's too big or too small. Obviously, they didn't think it was too big when they agreed to it under the Morrison government, but now they apparently do. But more saliently, they don't have any policy to reach any target, big, small, or in the middle. And David Littleproud is saying they're going to get to whatever target they eventually decide might be doable through another sort of magically cheaper, fairer, better policy, presumably different from all the other variations of that they've come up with over the last 20 years. But then Barnaby Joyce and others are saying nothing we do makes any difference. The whole international climate targets are a scam, which sounds very much like he thinks they shouldn't do anything at all. So this is an intractable, unsolvable division between climate skeptics and people who can see that they need a policy, and they're still trying to paper it over, and it does my head in.
And there are actual material consequences of this debate circling and circling and circling that drain as it has done for the past decade. What does it mean for Australia's climate policy? It
means just, you know, another decade maybe of lost opportunities. If you can't have the investment certainty for all these companies to invest in clean energy, renewable energy, it sends a bad message globally that we're not committed to this. Look, the Labor Party is in with a fairly large majority, and I think that will give investors a bit of reassurance that at least for the next 3 years, maybe 6 years, there's some kind of certainty around policy. But what we need really, and is bipartisanship on this if we're going to get it done. And if you look in the states where this has happened, where both the opposition and Labor are on board, like South Australia, the investment has been massive. And now South Australia runs many days, most of the time, 100% on renewables.
And that's why all of the major business groups want to keep the target. Like the business groups that the coalition used to sort of want to, you know, follow, Business Council of Australia, AI Group, they're all saying, please don't ditch this target, but they're tying themselves in knots over, you know, what to do, what not to do.
I am interested, though, about this debate and how much of it is actually a proxy fight over Sussan Ley's leadership as well. And I think there's an element of that. Like Scott Morrison in 2021 brought in the net zero goal, and I think some of that was through force of leadership, that he just wanted to settle this debate to, you know, try and put it in the past and move on. But you know, there's two things going on there. There are genuinely people in the coalition who don't like the net zero target and see this as the number one thing to get rid of. But there's other people who are just kind of, you know, shaping up for a fight over leadership and using this as a proxy.
And largely the same people who want to try and find a way to fight a sort of nativist, populist, Trumpian kind of fight. And this is one of the, you know, avenues that they want to use to attack in that way.
And politically, I guess the other effect, just to mention, is that it means that we're all going to be stuck in the Groundhog Day hellscape that we have been stuck in for the last 10 or so years, where we have to keep relitigating the same issues over and over again. And I thought it was sort of funny we're talking about Mamdani and the coalition in this episode as well, because it's just the burst of sort of freshness and newness from that campaign. The sense, I saw someone tweet like, finally something good has happened, and I knew exactly what they were talking about. It was this sense of like forward movement, whereas in Australia this week all we have is this sense of going back, staying in the same place, inertia. God. It's mind-numbing. And also politically it means that the Labor Party, there is no real pressure from an opposition to push our action on climate change forward, and they need that. Like, yes, they have a suite of policies and they are moving in the right direction, but we essentially are facing another 3-6 years of an opposition pulling us backwards in the other direction. It's just,
and sometimes in quite tangible ways. Like, the energy transition is, it's suffering some setbacks. It's not going as quickly as it should. Large-scale renewables are not being built as quickly as they need to be. Transmission lines are not being put in as quickly as they need to be. And that's partly because of genuine concern in some of those regional communities. But it's also being whipped up by these very same climate deniers in the coalition and some News Corp publications and Sky After Dark, and the Advance lobby group to really amplify those concerns, often with some misinformation. And that is an impediment to actually getting the job done as well. And the scrutiny on the government, like rational scrutiny on what the government is or isn't doing, is getting completely swamped by this, what kind of papering over the coalition will try and do this time.
Do you see any way that this mind-numbing debate can be finished once and for all?
Well, I think there is a prospect or a possibility that the coalition will split. But then it's not just the coalition splitting, right? Because there's the right wing of the Liberal Party is, of a similar view. Like, the right wingers in the Liberal Party are looking like they may well side with the National Party. So then you're left with a kind of moderate centre-right rump of the Liberal Party who are being eaten up by the Teals. I think they really have an existential problem on their hands, but there's no papering over anymore. I think they're at the end of the road of trying to kind of find some fudge to get through it that people will accept.
I guess one question to ask in all this is, like, could it actually be effective though? I think that, there's one reading of the last couple of election results that Labor won on climate policy and that the Teals won on climate policy. I certainly think that in the inner cities, climate is a key driving factor in the way people vote. I do wonder, though, if we're in an environment with ever-rising power prices, if people don't start to see the tangible benefits from the energy transition, if the Labor Party gets sloppy, if they sort of enter a period of chaos like they did in the previous Labor government, if a relentless focus on linking the net zero transition to higher energy bills could pay at least a sort of short-term dividend for the coalition. I can see a future where that could happen. They're a long way from an electoral victory, but
I think it's absolutely possible. And we saw what happened when Tony Abbott just went on Axe the carbon tax, which was the sanest climate policy we've ever had. And we wouldn't be having any of these discussions if it had just been left in place. But I guess then, if there was a genuine, we're climate skeptics and we don't want to do anything and we're blaming power prices argument from a sort of populist right-wing party, the weight would be on Labor to try and explain what they're doing and why. And that is a complicated political exercise in political communication. So it would sort of come back to authenticity and being able to do your job.
I also think there's a couple of steps that would need to be done. The coalition's not there yet. If they want to make that kind of argument, they can. But what are you going to do to bring down power prices? Well, they've been through that already under Tony Abbott. They were going to bring in these like clean coal power stations. They were going to bring in. If you want to make that argument, you actually have to bring a policy.
We would say so. But what I was saying before is each time when Tony Abbott was saying axe the tax, he had direct action as his policy, which, if you looked at it in any detail, was risible. But he sort of had a fig leaf of a policy in order to run the political attack. And I suspect that's what they do again.
2014, things have changed. There's a whole lot of power stations that are going offline rapidly. It's going to increase in the next few years. The situation is different, and you can't just go in and say we're going to fix this without a plan to do so, because I think you'll be torn apart. Also, the electoral mathematics are different, and Nick Evershed our data editor had quite an interesting piece here, just looking at this debate. People like Barnaby Joyce want to chase One Nation votes. Andrew Hastie has gone full nativist as well. And what type of party they should be. The Liberals in 2014, they had seats like Wentworth and Kooyong. They don't have those seats now. They've got to win them back somehow. And just saying we're going to do nothing on climate change, but we're going to bring down your power bills, is that going to resonate in Kooyong? Is that going to resonate in Wentworth? I don't really think so.
No, but if they said we've got this better, cheaper, fairer plan and we don't scrutinise it enough and we don't look at it enough, or the Labor Party or people advocating climate action don't explain well enough what they're doing.
The other wild card in all this, of course, is that Australia is only ever a few years away from the next major climate disaster. And, Scott Morrison found a electoral success with very vague policies on climate, but Black Summer arrives and all of a sudden it is all people can think about. So reality will intrude on the Liberals' plans once again, I suspect.
And now it's time for what we can't get out of our head this week. Lenore, what was that for you?
Mine's a bit depressing, but it does follow from what we've just been discussing. As we've been saying, Sussan Ley's under quite a lot of pressure as opposition leader. I was very pleased that she called out a truly outrageous comment by Andrew Hastie and I think Barnaby Joyce as well, that somehow women might seek late-term abortions in order to get paid parental leave. It was in the context of a debate over a bill allowing for people who have a stillborn child to get parental leave. What Sussan Ley said was losing a baby is one of the most difficult things that can ever happen to a mother and to a family. And as a mother and a grandmother, that is very personal. Any commentary about this bill applying in other contexts is insensitive. I think she's absolutely right.
And I think it was very notable that not a single Liberal woman spoke out against that bill as well. It was only the men saying that it could be potentially abused. Patrick, what can't you get out of your head this week?
Well, on a slightly lighter note,
we need it.
You know how much we love birds at Guardian Australia. Well, in New Zealand, they actually can claim the first Bird of the Year competition over there. But their winner over there, which is a type of falcon, a raptor, which is endangered. People have been warned to stay away from it because there's been reports of it dive bombing walkers who.
We had the magpie as Bird of the Year, and it dive bombs
people.
But
the magpie doesn't dive bomb you at 200 kilometres an hour like this.
It still hurts.
Falcon does. No, it does. It does. Someone who's been attacked quite recently by magpies, it can. Yeah.
I voted for the magpie because I was so scared of it. It was out of fear.
Trying to ingratiate yourself.
Yeah. Joe, what can't you get out of your head?
So mine is even lighter still. There was a clip that went viral on TikTok this week of a BBC journalist encountering the new star of Paddington the musical, which is a man inside a Paddington suit, but it's a sort of got a robotic face that is operated by another actor who's off stage. So it's a sort of 4 foot tall, incredibly lifelike Paddington bear. And the journalist, it's so bizarre. He's sort of a middle-aged BBC journalist, very proper. And as soon as he meets the bear on stage on camera, he goes, "Oh, it's Paddington." And he sort of becomes overwhelmed emotionally. Like a child by meeting this bear. And the bear says to him, "Oh, just take your time. It's okay." And it's this incredibly sweet, bizarre little moment between this actor and this journalist. But it was also just like a sort of a little moment of wonder on the internet this week. Yeah, very sweet.
It sounds so touching.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me this week, Joe.
Thank you.
And thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Bridie.
And thanks, Lenore.
Thanks, Bridie.